You have been our city's chief prosecutor for 2 months. Is this job matching your expectation, or it's a lot crazier?
It's certainly matching my expectation. It is very demanding, of course. Our city was in a state of crisis when I took over with respect to public safety. Our office was in a state of crisis after losing over 60 prosecutors and needing to overhaul the management team to bring in people who had prosecutorial experience. And so demanding, but as I said, very much expected.
Mm-hmm. And San Francisco's politics sometimes can be very aggressive. So what's the biggest lesson you learned so far?
Unfortunately, there's a faction of people that perhaps are more interested in the politics than in the solutions. And I think that is something that I'm having to get used to.
The controversy has been consistent since you took office. Your first management staff meeting was secretly recorded, and then you fire a dozen attorneys, and then many others also quit. So what's the current status of your office right now? Is it more still in flux, or is more stabilized right now?
No, it's much more stabilized. I think the first step was making sure that we brought in, like I said, experienced prosecutors to manage the office. The other thing is making sure that the lawyers who have been subject to a DA's race in 2019, a recall in just a year or a few months ago, a new DA being appointed who's also running. That's a lot of instability, for our lawyers, and making sure that they feel now that they can do their jobs effectively and not worry. All of us that are there understand that at the core of this work, it's not political. We have victims who need justice. We need to be making sure that we equip offenders to, rehabilitate themselves and enter back into society. And so I think people are focused on the work. I think a lot of the sort of politicization of it has been left.
Mayor Breed appointed you as district attorney, and there are news reports saying a lot of her staff have, a lot of cooperation with your office. And also you just hire one of her former advisors to be your chief of staff. How do you ensure your independence from mayor's office?
Because I'm my own person. I'm thankful that the mayor in the very beginning offered support from her office. Quite frankly, when I walked into the DA's office, Chesa, as well as his chief of staff, had approved extended leave for almost the entire executive management team. The mayor has never tried to dictate the way that I do this job. I interviewed more than one person for that position, and I chose who I thought was capable. I would hope the mayor is supportive of the district attorney. Right? We both are city leaders. We both have a city to serve. And I think what the city wants is for public safety to be a priority. I think those are things that are distractions from the reality. And I think the majority of the city wants to see not only the mayor's office in line with me, but the board of supervisors, the police chief, and everybody else. They want a safer city, and it's going to take everybody who's a city leader coming together to prioritize that.
You've been very vocal about keeping Asian American communities safe and also hold criminals accountable. So since you took office, have you charged any anti-Asian hate crime?
We have charged several cases. Of course, Ms. Wren's case, as most people are aware of, the elderly woman who was brutally assaulted and robbed in her building. We've charged Commissioner Chu's case, amongst others. In neither case do we have hate crime charges. I used to be the designated hate crimes prosecutor in this city, so I know firsthand what it takes to charge and to prove a hate crime. It's the one charge that requires proof of motive. You have to be able to go into the person's head and demonstrate to a jury what they were thinking at the time that they committed another crime. What I will say is that I recognize certainly that I believe there is racial targeting going on, and that is something that I think as the legal community we have to figure out how we're going to address. We need to make sure that our laws allow us to prosecute those crimes or those types of issues, adequately.
So it seems like when it comes to prosecuting hate crimes, it's easier said than done, right?
In a way, yes. I hate to put it that way, though. What I think is when you feel like you've been targeted because of what you look like, you want the charges to reflect what you feel happened. And it's a struggle for us as prosecutors when we can't offer that, right? When we have to follow the law, we have to follow it to the letter. Unfortunately, the way that the law is set up, it requires proof of actual hate or animus. And that's where it becomes difficult to prove, right, what is going on in the mind of somebody when they take a certain action. And if we don't have statements, or we don't have sometimes text messages or social media posts or something like that, it becomes very difficult to provide that proof.
San Francisco has a drug crisis, and you have implemented several new policies, right? Being more tough on drug dealers. So what might be the success look like?
So what I'm hoping is that we no longer see 30 or 40 drug dealers out on the street on a single block anymore. That's the goal. It's making sure that we are taking the steps necessary to deter those who think that coming to sell drugs in San Francisco is without risk. And I think that's what's been going on. The DA's office had effectively decriminalized drug sales. They didn't really see a consequence. And so we have had people commuting literally into the city from other surrounding cities to sell drugs here, as though that's a profession you can engage in. And so we want to be making sure that we implement policies to deter that behavior, because it's really our communities of color, our migrant communities that are suffering from not only having these sellers out on the street, but it attracts those who have addiction. It creates violence and other sort of collateral consequences for that behavior.
Mm-hmm. And will you consider that's a tactics of war on drugs?
I understand a lot of people want to use that term, but I think people have to understand that we're in a different place in history right now. Never have we seen a drug as lethal as fentanyl on our streets. We are losing San Franciscans every day to overdose. And we have an obligation as a city, and certainly as a DA's office, to make sure that we are keeping those who are most vulnerable, those who are suffering from addiction, safe. We can't allow people to be on the streets selling something that 2 milligrams is what it takes to kill someone.